All right, guys, free to choose. Chapter 6, free to choose. This part is called a voucher plan for elementary and secondary schooling. A voucher plan for elementary and secondary schooling. We're going to do this in two parts. We'll just read 6 pages because this goes up to 158 to 170. I don't want to make it that long. So we are on chapter 6 of free to choose. This is called What's Wrong with Our Schools. And in this part, it's a voucher plan for elementary and secondary schooling. Here we go. Schooling, even in the inner cities, does not have to be the way it is. It was not that way when parents had greater control. It is not that way now when parents It is not that way now where parents still have control. The strong American tradition of voluntary action has provided many excellent examples that demonstrate what can be done when parents have greater choice. One example at the elementary level is a parochial school, St. John Chrysostom's, that we visited in one of the poorest neighborhoods in New York City's Bronx. If funds come in part from a voluntary charitable organization, New York's Inner City Scholarship Fund, in part from the Catholic Church, in part from fees. The youngsters at the school are there because their parents chose it. Almost all are from poor families, yet their parents are all paying at least some of the costs. The children are well behaved, eager to learn. The teachers are dedicated. The atmosphere is quiet and serene. The cost per pupil is far less than in public schools, even after account is taken of the free services of those teachers who are nuns. Yet on the average, the children are 2 grades ahead of their peers in public school. That's because teachers and parents are free to choose how the children shall be taught. Private money has replaced tax money. Control has been taken away from bureaucrats and put back where it belongs. Another example, this one at the secondary level, is in Harlem. In the 1960s, Harlem was devastated by riots. Many teenagers dropped out of school. Groups of concerned parents and teachers decided to do something about it. They used private funds to take over empty stores, and they set up what became known as storefront schools. One of the first and most successful was called Harlem Prep, designed to appeal to youngsters for whom conventional education had failed. Harlem Prep had inadequate physical facilities. Many of its teachers did not have the right pieces of paper to qualify for certification to teach in public schools, but that did not keep them from doing a good job. Though many students had been misfits and dropouts, they found the sort of teaching they wanted at Harlem Prep. The school was phenomenally successful. Many of its students went to college, including some of the leading colleges, but unfortunately the story has an unhappy ending. After the initial period of crisis had passed, the school ran short of cash. The Board of Education offered Ed Carpenter, the head of the school and one of its founders, the money, provided he would conform to their regulations. After a long battle to preserve independence, he gave in. The school was taken over by bureaucrats. I felt, commented Mr. Carpenter, that a school like Harlem Prep would certainly die and not prosper under the rigid bureaucracy of a Board of Education. We had to see what was going to happen. I didn't believe it was going to be good. I am right. What has happened since we have come to the Board of Education is not all good. It is not all bad, but it's more bad than good. Private ventures of this kind are valuable. However, at best, they only scratch the surface of what needs to be done. One way to achieve a major improvement, to bring learning back into the classroom, especially for the currently most disadvantaged, is to give all parents greater control over their children's schooling. Similar to that which those of us in the upper income classes now have, parents generally have both greater interest in their child's schooling and more intimate knowledge of their capacities and needs than anyone else. Social reformers and educational reformers in particular often self-righteously take for granted that parents, especially those who are poor and have little education themselves, have little interest in their children's education and no competence to choose for them. That is a gratuitous insult. Such parents have frequently had limited opportunity to choose. However, U.S. history has amply demonstrated that given the opportunity, they have often been willing to sacrifice a great deal and have done so wisely for their children's welfare. No doubt some parents lack interest in their child's schooling or the capacity and desire to choose wisely. However, they are in a small minority. In any event, our present system unfortunately does little to help their children. One simple and effective way to assure parents greater freedom to choose while at the same time retaining present sources of finance is a voucher plan. Suppose your child attends a public elementary or secondary school. On the average, countrywide, it costs the taxpayer, you and me, about $2,000 per year in 1978 for every child enrolled. If you withdraw your child from a public school and send him to a private school, you save taxpayers about $2,000 per year, but you get no part of that saving, except as it is passed on to all taxpayers, in which case it would amount to at most a few cents off your tax bill. You have to pay private tuition in addition to taxes, a strong incentive to keep your child in a public school. Suppose, however, the government said to you, if you relieve us of the expense of schooling your child, you will be given a voucher, a piece of paper redeemable for a designated sum of money, if and only if it is used to pay the cost of schooling your child at if and only if it is used to pay the cost of schooling your child at an approved school. The sum of money might be 2,000 or might be a lesser sum, say 1,500 or 1,000, in order to divide the saving between you and the other taxpayers. But whether the full amount or the lesser amount, it would remove at least a part of the financial penalty that now limits the freedom of parents to choose. The voucher plan embodies exactly the same principle as the GI bills that provide for educational benefits to military veterans. The veteran gets a voucher good only for educational expense, and he is completely free to choose a school at which he uses it, provided that it satisfies certain standards. Parents could and should be permitted to use the vouchers not only at private schools, but also at other public schools. And not only at schools in their own district, city, or state, but at any school that is willing to accept their child. That would both give every parent a greater opportunity to choose, at the same time require public schools to finance themselves by charging tuition wholly if the voucher correspond to the full cost. That would both give every parent a greater opportunity to choose and at the same time require public schools to finance themselves by charging tuition wholly if the voucher corresponded to the full cost, at least partly if it did not. The public schools would then have to compete both with one another and with private schools. This plan would relieve no one of the burden of taxation to pay for schooling. It would simply give parents a wider choice as to the form in which their children get the schooling that the community has obligated itself to provide. The plan would also not affect the present standards imposed on private schools in order for attendance at them to satisfy the compulsory attendance laws. We regard the voucher plan as a partial solution because it affects neither the financing of schooling nor the compulsory attendance laws. We favor going much farther. Offhand, it would appear that the wealthier a society and the more evenly distributed its income within it, the less reason there is for government to finance schooling. So we favor going much farther. Offhand, it would appear that the wealthier a society and the more evenly distributed its income within it, the less reason there is for government to finance schooling. The parents bear most of the costs in any event, and the cost for equal quality is undoubtedly higher when they bear the cost indirectly through taxes than when they pay for schooling directly, unless schooling is very different from other government activities. Yet in practice, government financing has accounted for a larger and larger share of total educational expenses as average income in the United States has risen and income has become more evenly distributed. We conjecture that one reason is the government operation of schools, so that the desire of parents to spend more on schooling as their incomes rose found the path of least resistance to be an increase in the amount spent on government schools. One advantage of a voucher plan is that it would encourage a gradual move toward greater direct parental financing. The desire of parents to spend more on schooling could readily take the form of adding to the amount provided by the voucher. Public financing for hardship cases might remain, but that is a far different matter than having the government finance a school system for 90% of the children going to school because 5 or 10% of them might be hardship cases. Public financing for hardship cases might remain, but that is a far different matter than having the government finance a school system for 90% of the children going to school because 5 or 10% of them might be hardship cases. The compulsory attendance laws are the justification for government control over the standards of private schools, but it is far from clear that there is any justification for the compulsory attendance laws themselves. Our own views on this have changed over time. When we first wrote extensively a quarter of a century ago on this subject, we accepted the need for such laws on the ground that a stable democratic society is impossible without a minimum degree of literacy and knowledge on the part of most citizens. We continue to believe that, but research that has been done in the interim on the history of schooling in the United States, the UK, and other countries has persuaded us that compulsory attendance at schools is not necessary to achieve that minimum standard of literacy and knowledge. As already noted, such research has shown that schooling was well nigh universal in the United States before attendance was required. In the UK, schooling was well nigh universal before either compulsory attendance or government financing of schooling existed. Like most laws, compulsory attendance laws have costs as well as benefits. We no longer believe the benefits justify the costs. We realize that these views on financing and attendance laws will appear to most readers to be extreme. That is why we only state them here to keep the record straight without seeking to support them at length. Instead, we return to the voucher plan, a much more moderate departure from present practice. Currently, the only widely available alternative to a local public school is a parochial school. Only churches have been in a position to subsidize schooling on a large scale, and only subsidized schooling can compete with free schooling. Try selling a product that someone else is giving away. The voucher plan would produce a much wider range of alternatives, unless it was sabotaged by excessively rigid standards for approval. Hence what they call it when you're trying to, the environmental regulations, right? The choice among public schools themselves would be greatly increased. The size of a public school would be determined by the number of customers it attracted, not by politically defined geographical boundaries or by pupil assignment. Parents who organize nonprofit schools, as a few families have, would be assured of funds to pay the costs. Voluntary organizations ranging from vegetarians to Boy Scouts to YMCA could set up schools and try to attract customers. And most important, new sorts of private schools could arise to tap the vast new market. Let us consider briefly some possible problems with the voucher plan and some objections that have been raised to it. What number are we on? So we'll stop right there. So let us consider briefly, we'll just stop right here and we'll just, the voucher plan. Peace.